In addition to being pastor, I have several other roles. I won't go into them all. I'm going to highlight a couple of them. Last week, I told you about my involvement with Project Rescue. Project Rescue ministers to victims of human trafficking at 16 sites in 8 countries. I haven't been to all the sites yet, but I'm going to over the next couple of years. Stories are heartbreaking. Women and children endure unspeakable horrors. Yet in spite of all the hurt and pain and shame in their past, they have an unmistakable joy in Jesus. They sing, they dance, and they laugh because Jesus has rescued them with new life and fresh hope. I also serve on the global board for Live Dead, focused on planning churches among unreached people groups. In that capacity, I visit with brothers and sisters around the world who are persecuted because they follow Jesus. Every week I hear stories and updates of their commitment in spite of extreme suffering. It's incredibly inspiring. I hear the stories of ordinary people sold into sex slavery, believers beaten to the point of death for following Jesus, kicked out of their family and village, losing everything they have. Hearing what they face reminds me of Hebrews chapter 10 that says, "Remember those early days after you received light, when you stood your ground in a great contest in the face of suffering. Sometimes you were publicly exposed to insult and persecution. At other times you stood side by side with those who were so treated. You sympathized with those in prison and joyfully accepted the confiscation of your property because you knew you had better and lasting possessions. So do not throw away your confidence. It will be richly rewarded. You need to persevere so that when you've done the will of God, you will receive what He's promised." Now that's remarkable faith. And as I travel, I see that same attitude and spirit in the lives of those who face so much. And then I come home. And I pray God will give me patience with people who have petty complaints and selfish gripes. In light of what others face, it's increasingly difficult to listen to someone who's angry because they lost their parking place, the temperature's uncomfortable, they can't sit in their usual section, or they can't find the right trash can for their room. And what I want to say is, really? That's what you're worried about? Your parking place? I deal with people who are kicked out of their homes for following Jesus, and you're upset because you might get a door ding on your car? Please let me hurry outside and prepare a reserved spot for you so you'll never have to endure that horrible hardship again. You're going to stay home because it's too cold in here? Oh my goodness, let me rush to the thermostat and make everything just the way you want, because I wouldn't want the temperature in the sanctuary to be the reason you miss heaven. And what would we do without your cheerful spirit? Now, I don't say that, although I guess I just did. Most of the time, I hold my tongue and I walk away with a sad heart. And I wonder how those same people are possibly going to handle it if real difficulty ever comes their way. I wonder if they're really going to live for Jesus in spite of persecution and suffering when 5 degrees colder kicks them out the door. Now, I apologize if that came across a bit harsh, but the question's still valid. How are you going to handle difficulty and hardship? What will happen to your faith when things don't go as you expect? See, it's easy to be an overcomer when there's little to overcome. When things are going well, serving Jesus with a smile is simple. But what do you do when things go wrong? Even horribly bad. We're studying the book of Philippians. Paul wrote this letter to the church in Philippi from prison in Rome. Paul was in a difficult, dangerous situation. His obedience to the call of God had resulted in churches being planted all over the region. But now, because of that obedience, he was in a damp, dark dungeon of a prison cell. A couple years ago, I visited what many believe is the cell Paul was kept in. I stood there and tried to imagine what it must have been like as Paul wrote that letter. I thought about what I might write in that same situation. The letter was written to a church that was also in a difficult, dangerous situation. The believers in Philippi were suffering from poverty, isolation from society, and under increasing pressure because of their faith. That's the setting. This is a letter written to a church in trouble from a guy in trouble. Paul knew what the church was facing, so he wrote words of encouragement from his prison cell. It's a powerful passage that tells us what to do when things go wrong. After beginning with a greeting and a prayer, Paul wrote, "Now I want you to know, brothers, what's happened to me has really served to advance the gospel." Church in Philippi loved Paul. They were concerned about their friend, their mentor, their leader. Paul knew that, but he refused to have an inward focus. He didn't emphasize his situation or his pain. Instead, he turned the focus to others. I'm in prison. Things are tough, but I want you to know this is making a difference for the kingdom. The gospel is going forward, not in spite of my situation, but because of my situation. And it seems that Paul may have even believed that the purpose for his adversity was to advance the gospel. All through the book of Philippians, you see Paul handling adversity with joy. He looked for and he found kingdom opportunities in every situation. When you face hard times, be like Paul. Turn difficulty into opportunity. Don't be so focused on the hardship that you miss the opportunity to advance the cause of Jesus. Don't be so driven by your need to be rescued from a horrible situation that you miss your chance to rescue others. I think of Pam Harrell, our retired membership services director. 4 years ago, after her son Jake died in a plane crash, I watched Pam minister to others. In the middle of her grief, she spoke words of encouragement when she herself needed to be encouraged. She used her pain to reach out to others. And as people opened up to her, Pam shared Jesus and led people to faith. The stories are incredible. Her circumstance was horrible, but God used her through it. And then a year ago, I watched Pam again. This time she received a difficult diagnosis, a rare form of cancer. And once again, through surgery, chemo, and a challenging recovery, Pam focused on reaching out. She refused to allow cancer to keep her from joyfully sharing Jesus. Now, is Pam Harrell a super Christian? No, she just has a real faith in a real God who promised He'd always be with her. And she dares to believe that even in difficulty. She never takes her eyes off her kingdom assignment, that of sharing God's love and grace. When you face difficulty, look for opportunities to share Jesus. Look for people in the same situation who don't have the hope you have. Here's the principle. Pain opens doors for ministry. Walk through those doors. I should have put that in your outline. I don't know why I didn't. Pain opens doors for ministry. When it does, walk through those doors. Paul said, as a result, it's become clear through the whole palace guard and everyone else that I am in chains for Christ. The palace guard was the Praetorian Guard. These soldiers were elite troops assigned to the emperor. At any given time, there were between 9,000 and 14,000 of these highly influential, powerful guards in Rome. Paul wasn't talking to lowly prison guards. He was talking to the elite military leaders of the Roman government. Soldiers were assigned in 4-hour shifts. Some of them guarding the emperor, others of them guarding the preacher, Paul. And you might say, well, why were they guarding him? Because he had a little history of God breaking him out of jail. They're guarding him, and Paul said, the whole palace guard knows I'm in chains for Christ. They know I'm not guilty of any crime. How did they know that? Because Paul told them. And I imagine a soldier looking at the duty roster and thinking, great, I get to listen to the preacher again today. But over time, no doubt some of those soldiers heard the truth and put their trust in Jesus. And the message began to spread about the preacher prisoner, about his faith and his joy. The whole prison guard knew about it, and everyone else involved in Paul's case. This prisoner was now presumed innocent by his captors. And I wonder if the guards started trading shifts so they could be with Paul. Was there actually a waiting list to get to guard the preacher instead of the mean emperor? Here's the principle: pain knows no rank. People who are suffering with you are simply that, fellow sufferers. In times of pain and difficulty, be open to the possibility that God is opening doors that you could never open on your own. You might be able to share Jesus with prison officials, fellow passengers, high-ranking leaders, doctors, other patients, leaders of politics and society. Paul continued. He said, because of my chains, most of the brothers in the Lord have been encouraged to speak the word of God more courageously and fearlessly. In that one sentence, Paul acknowledged the difficulty of his situation, and he focused on the positive result. It wasn't just the soldiers who were impacted by Paul's words in prison. The church was also watching and listening. And the result was surprising. What you expect Paul to say is, because of my chains, most of my brothers of the Lord have gone into hiding, so they won't be thrown in jail too. They're meeting in secret, and they fear for their lives. That reaction wouldn't be surprising. If sharing Jesus put Paul in prison, then obviously it's not a good time to share Jesus. But instead of creating fear or timidity, Paul's imprisonment was a source of encouragement. The reaction of the church was this courageous fearlessness and boldness to share Jesus. And what they saw in Paul let them know Jesus is faithful even in prison. And so they began to tell the story of Jesus everywhere they went, right there in the seat of evil, the capital of the Roman Empire. Had to shock the Romans, because they had a plan. When we put their leader in jail, the Christians will be done. Instead, faith grew because of the way one man endured hardship and suffering. People watch you when you face difficulty and hardship. They want to know if you have a convenient, when everything is going well, faith, or if you have the kind of faith that will carry you through hard times. See, your witness is never stronger than it is when things are going wrong. When you respond with faith and hope and trust in Jesus, it inspires other people to do the same. God will use you to encourage and inspire others to boldly share their faith. Now, let me pause and let me answer kind of a challenging theological question that some of you no doubt have had. Did God cause Paul's predicament? Was it God's will that Paul was in prison? Did God cause Pam's cancer? Did God cause your suffering? Many Christians believe that hardship is an attack of Satan or a result of sin, that there's no way that God's will could ever include suffering. Now, that's a popular way to think, and you know why people want to think that way? Because no one wants to suffer. But that's not a scriptural way to think. Listen to what Paul wrote in Romans 5. Therefore, since we've been justified through faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom we've gained access by faith into this grace in which we now stand. And we rejoice in the hope of the glory of God. And now look at this part. Not only so, but we also rejoice in our sufferings, because we know that suffering produces perseverance. Perseverance, character, and character, hope. And hope does not disappoint us, because God has poured out His love into our hearts by the Holy Spirit whom He's given us. I don't know if God caused Paul to be in prison, but God used it in a powerful way. So much so that 2,000 years later, we still find encouragement and comfort from this letter. Paul said, rejoice in suffering because of what it produces in you. You're going to face suffering and difficulty. We all do. That's part of living on this earth. People will never forget how you deal with it. When you face it, choose joy. You get to choose. In that moment, choose your legacy. Choose how you'll be remembered. Choose what people will think about you. A legacy is an intentional thing. We have a whole group of people here who are crafting a lasting legacy. I mean, I could talk about so many. The one I think of is Greg Burrell. Greg started teaching at Central Junior High in 1976, and he spent 33 years in the Pulaski County Special School District. How many believe that could be suffering? He retired in 2009. And rather than sit back and enjoy retirement and make it all about him, weekly he's a greeter, and he's a member of the security team in the MAC, working with our kids. He goes out of his way to connect to every kid and make them feel welcome in God's house. And the kids love Mr. Greg. What a wonderful legacy. One way or another, you are leaving a legacy. So why not purposefully make it great? Now, the next few verses are a bit confusing, but now that you understand the context, I think they'll become clear. It's true, some preach Christ out of envy and rivalry, but others out of goodwill. The latter do so in love, knowing that I'm put here for the defense of the gospel. The former preach Christ out of selfish ambition, not sincerely, supposing they can stir up trouble for me while I'm in chains. So some people are preaching about Jesus for good motives. Others, they're stirring up trouble for Paul. And Paul's response to that is, what does it matter? The important thing is that in every way, whether from false motives or true, Christ is preached, and because of this, I rejoice. Paul was a popular leader, but he was a polarizing leader. He was bold, he was direct, he was confrontational. And as a result, some of the other preachers and church leaders were intimidated and competitive. There was some jealousy. So now, with Paul on the shelf, Paul in prison, they were taking advantage of the opportunity to elevate themselves. They were still preaching the gospel, but while they were preaching the gospel, they were also taking shots at Paul. And Paul knew that and heard that, and his response was, hey, I get that. I know what's going on, but don't worry about me. I'm okay. You don't have to defend me, because the important thing is that the message of Jesus and his love is being shared. Paul wasn't worried about who got the credit. He just wanted people to know Jesus. Here's a principle you won't like. Critics are attracted to your suffering. They see it as a free chance to take unfair shots. It hurts. When you're already struggling, their insensitive, cruel words are mean-spirited and unfair. So rise above it. When you're facing hardship, rise above the critics. Rise above the people who want to put you down and bring discouragement. Ignore their words and their attitudes and their attacks. Don't waste your emotional energy. Don't waste your physical energy fighting them. Instead, concentrate on what matters. Here's an awesome lesson. Keep your eyes on Jesus and ignore the critics. The critics will always be there, but guess what? Jesus is always there too. Paul didn't rejoice because of prison. He rejoiced because of what prison had done, both in him and through him. He saw past the bars of his cell to people being impacted by the gospel. Then Paul moved from the present, I rejoice, to the future. He started looking ahead. He said, yes, I will continue to rejoice. For I know that through your prayers and the help given me by the Spirit of Jesus Christ, what's happened to me will turn out for my deliverance. Now, this is one of those places where the English translations of the Bible don't really convey the full impact. Paul was actually quoting a verse from the book of Job. Job 13:16 that says, indeed, this will turn out for my deliverance. So when this was read out loud in the church, they would have immediately recognized the words, and they would have connected Paul's words to Job's story. Paul was saying, I'm in a bad place. I'm in jail. But just like Job, I have a God who saves me, and he will deliver me from the cell. And I rejoice, not because of the cell. I rejoice because of the mighty God I serve. This is an important balance point. Paul rejoiced at all the good things that were happening because he was in prison. But he was also looking forward to God's deliverance. Paul didn't like prison. He definitely didn't want to stay there, but he knew God would use him while he was there. Come on, being joy-filled and accepting hardship doesn't mean you have to accept difficulty as your forever fate. The same Spirit of God that lets you live in peace also lets you live in hope. So you say, but Rod, what if God doesn't deliver me? Didn't Paul die? It seems like his hope in God didn't pay off. Well, hold on. Now that you know all that context, now that you know what comes before it, now the familiar verse that comes next, this is even more powerful. Paul said, I eagerly expect and hope that I will in no way be ashamed, but will have sufficient courage so that now, as always, Christ will be exalted in my body, whether by life or by death. Life or death, he will be exalted. What an incredible approach. Read it this way, whether I'm released or I'm executed, Christ will be exalted. Paul expected to be released from prison, but if not, he knew what waited for him was another chance to rejoice. That's why he was able to say, for me, to live is Christ and to die is gain. I mean, that's powerful faith in the face of suffering. No matter what happens, I win. I can't lose. Alive, I'm saved. Dead, I'm saved. If I'm to go on living in the body, this will mean fruitful labor for me. What shall I choose? I don't know. I'm torn between the two. I desire to depart and be with Christ, which is better by far. But it's more necessary for you that I remain in the body. Convinced of this, I know I'll remain, and I will continue with all of you for your progress and joy in the faith, so that through my being with you again, your joy in Christ Jesus will overflow on account of me. Now, don't miss the choice Paul was making. It sounds good and heroic to choose the people over going to heaven. It would be easy for those of us who love life to dismiss this as, well, of course Paul wanted to live rather than die. But Paul knew what lay ahead. Paul wasn't choosing a life of pleasure and comfort. He knew that to live was to face more persecution. He'd continue to be beaten and experience pain, but Paul was willing to suffer because it was better for others. And Paul lived another 5 to 8 years after this. 8 years of persecution, pain, abandonment, and prison. Paul chose that over heaven because he wanted Jesus to be known among the Philippians. Paul chose what was best for others over what was best for himself. See, the natural response to pain and suffering is to turn selfish. That's just what we do. That's human nature. Think about it. When you're sick, all you think about is getting better. You want to be waited on hand and foot, especially if you're a guy. You're not thinking about anyone or anything else. One thing matters, getting over this stupid flu. When your world is falling apart, all you can think about is getting past the pain and suffering. But even in your pain, especially in your pain, keep your outward focus. Put others first. That's what Paul did. That's what Jesus did. And Paul finished his thought this way. Powerful, powerful words. Whatever happens, whatever's coming next, whatever happens to me, whatever happens to you, conduct yourself in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ. See, far too many people invalidate their faith by their reaction to hardship. Whatever happens to you, whatever life brings, whatever suffering or hardship or sickness or pain comes your way, whatever happens, good or bad, let your words and attitudes and actions bring glory to Jesus. Keep doing right. Suffering will come. Hardship and difficulty happen. And so now you get to choose. How are you going to be known? How will you be remembered? How will this moment in your life be remembered? Will you bow your heads with me? And I want to pray for you if you're currently facing difficulty. Now, understand, we just talked about Paul in prison, and so it would be easy to look at Paul and say, well, this difficulty is nothing compared to that. But we're all at our slice and stage of life, and although you're not in prison for your faith, it's a struggle, it's hardship, it's difficulty. If you're currently facing difficulty, I want to pray with you. Currently having a hard time, difficulty, you're facing a struggle, I want you to stand up. We're going to pray. Say, what are people going to think? Well, they're going to think you're facing difficulties, since that's what I said we're going to pray about. All right, I've purposely left time. If you're standing, I want you to come stand across the front. We're going to pray. And here's how we're going to pray. We're going to pray like Paul prayed. We're going to pray that God will deliver you from the difficulty. But we're also going to pray that in the middle of the difficulty, people will see God in you, and that your faith will be strong, and that your family and friends and people watching you will be drawn to Jesus because of the way you handle this, and that other people watching will be bolder, and they'll be able to face difficulty and struggle because they see the way you do. Oh yeah, we're praying you get out of it. But we're praying that whatever happens, your words and your actions and your attitudes will bring glory to Jesus. Now I want to ask everybody else to stand as well. And if there's somebody down here that you want to pray with, would you come pray with them? I just love to have 2 or 3 people with every person down here. There's something encouraging to know that people are with you. In the same way Paul was encouraged by the faith of the Philippians, let's encourage the faith of our brothers and sisters. And we're going to pray. We're going to pray that God will deliver you from difficulty and that he will use you through the difficulty. Come on, let's believe that together.